Our first speaker is Dominic Stinton. He's the CEO of BMF Australia, who are one of the really great ad agencies and do a lot of digital work, and he's going to be talking about how digital advertising is 50 years old. Who would have thought? Welcome.
I'm going to talk about a digital advertising guru, someone I only came across about 6 months ago, but I read this great book on him and he totally blew my mind because he synthesized probably all of the thinking I've had working with some great creative leaders over the last 20 odd years, people like John Hegarty or Steve Henry, or more recently Warren Brown. I'd love to say that I've met this guy, this digital advertising guru, but he died the year I was born, unfortunately. And as I'm clearly not a millennial, that was quite a long time ago. This guy I'm going to talk about, digital advertising guru, never did any digital advertising in his career. He didn't even write a single TV ad. All his advertising was done predominantly through print. And his name is Howard Gossage. And I wouldn't be surprised if, like me, you hadn't heard of Howard Gossage. He was quite an enigmatic character. He was based in San Francisco, which back in the 60s was the backwaters of the advertising industry. As we all know now, the madmen were all focused in Madison Avenue. He also never allowed his agency to grow to more than 13 people. He would fire clients or turn business down because he thought that any agency over the size of 13 was ineffective. And clearly there were a lot of other more famous ad men of that time compared to him. But there's a great quote from Rory Sutherland, who works for Ogilvy in the UK. I love this. He says that for the cognoscenti, and I count myself as one of those, and you guys hopefully will be part of the Howard Gossage movement in 15 minutes' time, Howard was the velvet underground to Ogilvy's Beatles and Bernbach's Stones, so less mainstream, but arguably more influential. And I think it's going to start with a couple of principles of Howard Gossage's. So, importantly, he viewed advertising as a pollutant, that unless it was doing some kind of social good, it was effectively an irritant. And he believed that he believed that the ability for advertisers to communicate to us consumers was a privilege and absolutely not a right. And he said something along the lines of, you know, people read what interests them. Sometimes that's advertising. And I guess his arch nemesis in the 60s was another guy who smoked cigarettes very well, called Rosser Reeves. Now, Rosser Reeves was a titan of advertising as well. He was the creative leader of Bates Agency. Now, Rosser Reeves was famous for coming up with the unique selling proposition. And he believed that advertising was a science and not an art, and that all advertisers needed to do was to find that unique product selling point, blast it with a lot of big budget across as many channels as possible, particularly television, and sooner rather than later, the consumer will surrender and buy. Now, Howard Gossage hated Rosser Reeves because he thought that the idea of television being beamed into our lives incessantly was incredibly intrusive. And so he wanted to set out to do things differently. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is he pioneered the pseudo event. And what I think is crucial to digital advertising today is PR. I love PR. And I think we saw the BBC presentation earlier, that how much news is consumed on our mobile. If you can get into that news feed, people will believe what they read. And Howard Gossage knew this. He said, what is written is the truth. So he created pseudo events because he also spurned big budgets. So he was working with tight budgets, again, which is probably a familiar thing today. And just one example of those, he did some advertising for Nucoa, this margarine, and he ran a press ad, and the headline was concerned with New York prayers go with Dudley. And Dudley was a guy who was going to fly the next day above Hollywood, and he was going to spell out the brand across the Hollywood skies in a smoke trail. Now, of course, Dudley spelt the name wrong on the first day, and the journalists absolutely loved this. So the next day, Howard Gossage ran another ad saying, Nuco has spelt noops, what's going on? And so he created this huge news event where Nuco was variously spelt noops, Nuco, Nucov, etc. So I guess what's interesting here is he understood and he pioneered the pseudo event. Next up, he did all his advertising almost exclusively in a magazine called The New Yorker. And he hated the term target audience, like they were there to be sort of shot at with a blunderbuss. And he viewed his readers as his friends. Interesting language given the dominance of Facebook in today's culture. And he also was asked by his clients, who were used to ad agencies creating a year's worth of advertising or content, they would say to him, how many ads are you going to do for us? And he would say, you do one ad and see what happens, then you do another. And what's interesting about this is a quote from him. He said, our advertising runs counter to the usual procedure of preparing a whole year's campaign in advance, which of course is more convenient, but commits you to more or less static advertising. It's a very difficult task, as anyone who runs a real-time creative department will know. So how did he create these interactive ads? He did it via coupons. So he would run press ads. It'd start off with one ad, and it'd include a coupon. Now, coupons were nothing new in advertising in the 60s, but they were almost always used as a direct response mechanism to order a sample or to, get a brochure, etc. He used coupons very differently. They were rarely used by him to sell anything, but he just wanted, to say to the consumer, hey, come on, write to us sometime and tell us how things are going. So if you take this ad for Qantas, a very simple brief. TWA had bought a new plane, and they called it the Super G Constellation. And Qantas hadn't yet named this. So the coupon below reads, and the competition was, be the first on your block to win a kangaroo. And the coupon read, I think it's a shame that your speedy, sybaritic super constellations do not have as nice a name as TWAs. In an effort to correct all of this, I suggest that they be called, fill in the coupon here. Now, he got bag loads of posts when he did this style of advertising. He would get up to 5,000, 6,000 letters a week or coupons a week. In this instance, a young girl won this competition, and she wanted to call the plane Sam. This is an interesting piece of whiskey advertising. He was so convinced that his friends on the New Yorker would be reading his content, that he was going to be at the top of their edge rank, if we want to use today's parlance, that he would finish the ad in mid-sentence and continue it the next week. And of course, you've got a little coupon here. Gentlemen, please send me my, however you pronounce it, badge. I'll read next week's installment to find out what it's all about. I'm printing this so you can read it. And he just carried on with this long copy sort of style of advertising, which is incredibly irreverent. And not one person said that word today. And imagine what client here today, working for a big petroleum company, would buy a headline like this. If you're driving down the road and you see a fee in the station and it's on your side, so you don't have to make a U-turn through traffic, and there aren't 6 cars waiting, and you need gas or something, please stop in. Again, this was the start of a long-running campaign where he absolutely ripped the piss out of Rosser Reeves' style of unique selling proposition. Rosser Reeves would have said, your petrol is unique. And he said, bollocks, petrol's petrol. And so he lampooned this by then suggesting that the gas, or the air which you would fill up your tires with at Fina petrol stations was pink, and it was pink air. And, you know, you could send off for pink air, and you'd get a little pink balloon back in the post from him. Now, the other really interesting guy who came into Gossage's life was this bloke, Marshall McLuhan. In 1964, he had written this book called Real Media, and he was an unknown Canadian academic. And Howard Gossage was reading his book in the middle of the night. A light bulb went off his head of what he was reading, because it completely fed into his theory of branding and advertising. Because Marshall McLuhan wrote about technology in a way which is staggering to read today. So, of course, his biggest claim to fame was that the medium is the message. So, really interesting conversation earlier, which is what comes first, the idea or technology? Marshall McLuhan might argue technology. He says we sometimes focus on content too much. It's the way in which we're engaging with technology which changes us. Look at how mobile is changing our behaviors. And so Howard Gossage called this guy up in the middle of the night. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and he got out of bed. And Gossage's first words to Marshall McLuhan were, "I'm going to make you famous." And he got him down to LA, or to San Francisco, sorry. And the rest was history. This guy became a huge celebrity. And he was saying stuff in 1964 like this, and this is in his book, Real Media. In this electronic age, and he's talking about televisions and radios, remember here? In this electronic age, we see ourselves being translated, us as people, more and more into the form of information, moving toward the technological extension of consciousness. What's so exciting about this early hippie thinking is people like Steve Jobs were hugely influenced by this. You know, Steve Jobs took LSD as well as founded great technology companies. He understood that we were expanding into a different type of consciousness. And this quote from 1967 is really quite prescient. So Marshall McLuhan foretold the creation of an electrically computerized dossier bank, that one big gossip column that is unforgiving, unforgetful, and from which there's no redemption, no erasure of early mistakes like getting pissed on a Saturday night and doing a selfie. Now, why did Marshall McLuhan cause the light bulb to go off above Gossage's head? It's because Howard Gossage saw ideas about brand and culture flowing freely between people in a perpetual state of discourse, dialogue, and collaboration. So you could summarize the Gossage way as being a new kind of opt-in contract between advertiser and consumer, viewing your audience as your friends, having a 100% irreverent approach. Actually, funny enough, he said, don't confuse your product with the message. He would take quite circuitous routes to engaging people, and often the product would come in very, very, very subtly. Content strategy. And he pioneered pseudo-event launches, had an interactive campaign structure made up of coupons, and he always reacted to feedback loops. Now, we've got data people and all these ad agencies around at the moment. No one knows how to really use them. They're all sitting in little silos, doing a little bit of CRM over here, creative departments over here. We've got the opportunity now to get these data people into the fucking creative department, where they can study feedback loops as to how consumers are reacting to our creativity, and campaigns can be properly told like stories. So where are we 50 years later? I still think Rossa Reeves would be very proud of where we've got to with digital advertising. I bet there's not a single person in this room who doesn't groan when you're not served up with a, thankfully, 5-second ad which you can skip on YouTube, particularly when it's 15 or 30 seconds. Christ. Yes, I think there is more beautiful content coming, Phil, but there's still a lot of shit in my Facebook feed. And lastly, Spotify, one of my favorite services. They use advertising as a stick to beat me, to make me go premium and pay for them. So where does this leave us? So what's the future of advertising? Because again, you know, digital, as someone said earlier, what's the future of advertising? Let's say no to the ghastly media neutral idea. How many of you talk about the media neutral idea? That's Rossa Reeves in disguise. That's just take one single thing, plaster it across every channel. The finance director walks in the room and goes, yeah, that's integration, thank you. Let's say no to that. Let's say hello to collaborative storytelling. Let's focus on creativity that can't be ignored, being irreverent. Let's engage people. And let's make sure we build response mechanisms into everything we do. And lastly, let's respond to the world, not just a plan. Thank you very much.